Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, The Lost World, by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I've had this book for more than half my life, and it's in really good condition despite the fact that I've read it a lot. And I think it's because it's among my favorite books in spite of a lot of the ways in which it is problematic. This book was written in 1912 by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the same person that wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. This is a 2004 printing. It's a fun book. I'll show you some of the style of the way it's written, or what it looks like in here. Some of the editing is noteworthy in that it also includes footnotes. So on this page, the footnote accompanies this line of text, and the character speaking is Gladys, a important but not well written character. She is speaking about her ideal man in this section. He would be a harder, sterner man, not so ready to adapt himself to a silly girl's whim. But above all, he must be a man who could do, who could act, who would look death in the face and have no fear of him, a man of great deeds and strange experiences. It is never a man that I should love, but always the glories he had won, for they would be reflected upon me. Think of Richard Burton. When I read his wife's life of him, I could so understand her love. There's a footnote there for in the line, think of Richard Burton, that says, Sir Richard Francis Burton, 1821 to 1890, an adventurer and scholar. So there are some ways in which this is edited. It also includes footnotes about like how much a stone weighs, which matters in part of the book because one of the characters, the narrator actually, is 15 stone, which the footnote then says is 210 pounds. So before the book starts is a quote by the author that reads, I have wrought my simple plan, if I give 1 hour of joy to the boy who's half a man, or the man who's half a boy. I've read this book since I was 10 years old. Since then, it's been almost 2 decades, and in that time, I've been a boy, a teenager, a young man, and now a man, and each time I've read this, it's been fun. It's been different kinds of fun as I've grown up, but my perspective on certain parts of the writing has changed, but it is still a fun adventure and a very fun coming of age story. The main character, the narrator, this is a first person perspective book. The narrator is a grown man. He's a journalist for a newspaper, and he's a rugby player, and he's an adult. He's courting a lady, Gladys, and he's the youngest of the main cast, and they constantly refer to him as boy. I don't know if his age is ever specified in the book, but he's an adult, but it's still a coming of age, or rather coming into manhood kind of story. He has certain ideas about what he does in life, but the way Gladys talks on page 5 is important. The main character replies to Gladys's statement, we can't all be Stanleys and Burtons. Besides, we don't get the chance. At least, I never had the chance. If I did, I should try to take it. But chances are all around you. It is the mark of the kind of man I mean that he makes his own chances. You can't hold him back. I've never met him, and yet I seem to know him so well. There are heroisms all around us, waiting to be done. It's for men to do them, and for women to reserve their love as a reward for such men. And then she mentions a Frenchman who went up in a balloon and ended up 1,500 miles off course and landed in Russia. But she says, that's the kind of man I mean. Think of the woman he loved and how other women must have envied her. That's what I should like, to be envied for my man. I'd have done it to please you. But you shouldn't do it merely to please me. You should do it because you can't help it, because it's natural to you. Because the man in you is crying out for heroic expression. Now, when you described the Wigan coal explosion last month, could you not have gone down and helped those people in spite of the choke damp? And then he replies that he did, and she didn't know that, and he says it was nothing worth mentioning. And then he says, in response to her reply, that's very brave of you, he says, if you want to write good copy, you must be where the things are. And she says, what a prosaic motive. It seems to take all the romance out of it. And so that's what this book is. It is a romantic adventure. It is an adventure set in that era of romance, that these men are doing great things, and their adventures, they don't necessarily care about a woman, though rather I should say they don't focus on a woman. They are doing these things because adventure calls to them. And Gladys is outlining that's what her ideal man is. Someone who finds an opportunity and takes it, latches onto it, and does something really amazing. And the first chapter is named after that line. There are heroisms all around us. The author's name is Ed Malone, and it takes a while to get to it, but the main plot picks up when Malone is looking for one of these stories, one of these adventures that would get Gladys to focus her attention on him. And so he goes to his editor, and his editor says, try this Professor Challenger fellow. He's difficult and cantankerous, but you might be able to get something worth writing out of it. He shows up at Professor Challenger's house, who is a very big and strong scientist and explorer, and one who seems to absolutely revile journalism and journalists in general. And Malone tries to convince him that he's one of the good ones, a good journalist, but Professor Challenger puts him to the test and finds him mostly lacking in intelligence. But when they wrestle, and their wrestling and fighting carries out into the street, Ed Malone stands up and says, no, I was bothering this man. He gave me the chance to leave, and he had to force me out of his house. Even though Professor Challenger threw the first punch and did it rather unexpectedly, Malone decides to put the blame on himself, which Professor Challenger sees as the narrator having some level of integrity. His attitude towards this young man cools, and he then proceeds to invite him to a talk that is happening later with all these major scientists. And so he shows up, and they are discussing evolution and prehistory and paleontology, and Professor Challenger, who is on this panel on the stage for some reason, despite being hated by basically every single person on the panel, Professor Challenger believes that he has found a place in the Amazon where dinosaurs still roam the earth, and where he found and shot a pteranodon, but he lost the body in one of the many rapids in the Amazon. But he knows where those dinosaurs are to be found and is willing to lead an expedition. During this talk, they say, then I guarantee that I will place in your hands such material as will enable you to find your way. It is only right, however, since Mr. Summerlee goes to check my statement, that I should have one or more with him who may check his. I will not disguise from you that there are difficulties and dangers. Mr. Summerlee will need a younger colleague. May I ask for volunteers? It is thus that the great crisis of a man's life springs out at him. Could I have imagined when I entered that hall that I was about to pledge myself to a wilder adventure than had ever come to me in my dreams? But Gladys, was it not the very opportunity of which she spoke? Gladys would have told me to go. I had sprung to my feet. I was speaking, and yet I had prepared no words. At the same time, I was aware that a tall, thin man, with dark, gingery hair a few seats in front of me, was also upon his feet. He glared back at me with hard, angry eyes, but I refused to give way. I will go, Mr. Chairman, I kept repeating over and over again. Name, name. My name is Edward Dunn Malone. I am the reporter of the Daily Gazette. I claim to be an absolutely unprejudiced witness. What is your name, sir? The chairman asked of my tall rival. I am Lord John Roxton. I have already been up the Amazon. I know all the ground and have special qualifications for this investigation. Lord John Roxton's reputation as a sportsman and a traveler is, of course, world famous, said the chairman. At the same time, it would certainly be as well to have a member of the press upon such an expedition. So Professor Challenger moves that both men accompany Mr. Summerlee, and eventually Professor Challenger joins them, and the adventure starts. In Brazil, these four men follow Professor Challenger's route to this deep in the Amazon location, where at this point the narrative changes from kind of mildly London English racist, the sort that you would find in a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories, to something that is very explicitly demeaning and condescending towards a lot of people. There are the cannibals that they have to avoid in the Amazon that are savage and live in this untamed wilderness that if they even step foot on the banks of the river, they will be killed. And that these people communicate with drums over long distances, but are only barely human by Professor Challenger's description. And then there are these men that are mestizo, that mixed Hispanic, and they are all cruel or evil in the way that a lot of Spaniards were in English literature around the turn of the 1800s into the 1900s. And even more so, Professor Challenger is explicitly and openly racist towards the Irish, who he claims are African in blood, but he does not use that word. He uses a more racist and terrible term I'm not going to replicate, but it's an anthropological term from way back when. And with this mindset, he's very condescending towards basically anyone that isn't a white Englishman. And even then, when the Irishman does do something impressive, he claims, oh, well, you know, the Irish are alleged to have some psychic powers of some sort. He doesn't like being proven wrong, that someone is a better outdoorsman, a better sportsman, a better scientist than him. He has some excuse. Oh, well, this person is just psychic. This person is a born athlete. These people are better at, you know, this, that, or the other. I could never compare. So he's got all these condescending attitudes about him on this plateau where they do indeed find dinosaurs, where they do indeed find pteranodons, where they find prehistoric animals. They also find prehistoric hominids, which makes no sense whatsoever. This is deep in the heart of the Amazon. There have never been any pre-human hominids discovered in the Americas, and so for pre-human hominids, a missing link, quote unquote, to be in the Amazon is almost impossible to believe in the modern era. But this is written in 1912, more than 100 years ago, and when certain attitudes about what discoveries lay out there were still, well, out there. But the four Englishmen, are stuck on this plateau. They get on because of a tree bridge from a pillar about 60 feet away from the edge of the plateau. But once they get there, the tree is pushed down by one of these mestizo, a brother of someone Lord John Roxton had killed some years back. And so the four men have to survive and have to find a way down, while also trying to find proof of Professor Challenger's claims. And he does. He proves it almost immediately. They see the Stegosaurus, they see other things. Mr. Summerlee is excited. Well, won't they believe us? And Professor Challenger says no. Even a dead animal, a dead baby Stegosaurus or a dead baby Tyrannosaur, would only appear in the eyes of the world that they had fabricated a fake animal through excellent taxidermy skills. That nothing less than a living, breathing, moving animal would convince the world of the truth of Professor Challenger's claims. Even having a witness doesn't matter. The witnesses do not matter. All that matters is getting living proof of their claims. And eventually Professor Challenger and the Summerlee and Lord John Roxton are captured by these missing links. Malone is not, because he's out on a nighttime walk at the time, and the other three men get captured for sacrifice by these missing links. Lord John Roxton escapes and finds Malone, and they arm themselves to the teeth to save their friends, and they do. And they also save some humans, some actual humans that they aren't as condescending towards, but that they believe are akin to the tribes of the Amazon. And they bring those people back. Those few tribesmen end up helping out the four men. And when they go to the lake to collect water, this lake in the middle of the plateau, they see a whole war party, dozens, almost 100 men that have shown up to retrieve one of their tribesmen in particular, who Professor Summerlee and Challenger believe to be the son of the chieftain of this larger community. They cross the lake in their canoes and bring as many men as they can. And when they find the chieftain's son alive and well, and having been rescued by these four white men, the tribesmen, you would think at this point it turns into a white savior kind of moment, and in a way it does, but the white men are concerned with surviving and getting off the plateau. But the tribesmen, they're concerned with ending their ancient foe, these missing link ape men. And with these four men with their guns, their like thunder sticks as they call it, or pantomime it, with these four men, we can turn the tide. And so the 100 or so men go out there, and the ape men attack in the plains, but the humans in the plains have the advantage because they are better runners, they are better walkers. They don't have to occasionally put one hand on the ground. They can walk with shield and spear. And in the plains, these men win. But the ape men live in trees in the forest. And so when the humans get into the forest, it is then that the battle really starts. Ape men fall out of trees and kill one or two humans before they get attacked, or they throw rocks and pelt them, the humans, with these with projectiles. And the humans start losing until Lord John Roxton goes ham with his shotgun, with his rifle. He starts killing a lot of these ape men, and then the battle turns, and the humans find the ape men's community, and at this point it becomes more passive engagement by the four white men. They watch as these tribesmen commit genocide against their ancient foe. They kill all the male ape men that are able to fight, push them off of the plateau onto the ground hundreds of feet below, and then enslave the women and children of the ape men. And they claim that these are the battles that really mattered. The chapter is actually named after one of the quotes in that moment. Challenger states, "We have been privileged to be present at one of the typical decisive battles of history, the battles which have determined the fate of the world. What, my friends, is the conquest of one nation by another? It is meaningless. Each produces the same result. But those fierce fights, when in the dawn of ages the cave dwellers held their own against the tiger folk, or the elephants first found that they had a master, those were the real conquests, the victories that count. By this strange turn of fate, we have seen and helped to decide even such a contest. Now, upon this plateau, the future must ever be for man." At that point, the story changes. They are, for the most part, able to get the help they need to start finding ways off the plateau, but the tribesmen are reluctant to help them, and in fact try to hinder the four Englishmen, or the three Englishmen and the Irishmen, from getting off the plateau. Malone, who is the youngest of them, seems to have an affinity with the son of the chieftain, and the son of the chieftain comes up and gives him somewhat of a map indicating each of the caves on this cliff face where the humans live, and one cave that has an X in front of it that should have a way out. As it turns out, that way out is still 80 feet above the ground, but with their ingenuity, they are able to get out of the plateau safely. I'm not going to ruin the ending for you. I've already ruined one of the major plot points, but there's a lot of adventure that goes on in this book, and a lot of it is of its times. A lot of it is probably even a bit racist for its times. Professor Challenger isn't supposed to be a good person. He's supposed to be a cantankerous person, someone who's hard to get along with. He doesn't respect people unless they prove themselves to be better people than Professor Challenger perceives himself to be. He is incredibly hard to earn the respect of, and that is what makes this book really interesting. Edward Malone is a good narrator, but it is of the exploits and the thoughts of Professor Challenger that make this book interesting, which I think Arthur Conan Doyle understood, because Professor Challenger ended up having a few books in a series, the Professor Challenger series, of turn-of-the-century science fiction. The Lost World is really the only one that is worth reading of those three, and Professor Challenger is the only reoccurring character between them all, but it's a really interesting narrative, this first one. I really love it, and I come back to it because it's a very good coming of age, coming into manhood story. It's fun to read over and over, despite, or rather in spite of, its flaws. So, The Lost World is good. If you have a chance to read it, I would highly recommend you pick it up. It hasn't been adapted into a faithful movie, really, since the 1950s. So practical and CGI effects in the modern era aren't really being used to portray this story, which is honestly fair. The general political mood of the 2010s and 2020s isn't really welcoming, especially if it were to be made in the modern era. Gladys would have to be changed, and the reasoning for Malone's involvement with the story would have to be changed as well. But overall, like I said, it's a good book and I love it, and if you find it on the bookshelves of your local bookstore, pick it up, read it, and enjoy it. Share it with other people. Anyway, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.